Mr. Ambassador, hi.
Hello.
Thanks for accepting our invitation. I know that you have a lot of different work. Thanks indeed for your time. For me, it's very important to take such kind of interview. I was in Egypt twice this year. I hope I will go next year, maybe even this year. And I know that Egypt, the relations between our countries, they have a good tendency. And even in September, there was a phone call between our president, President Zelensky, and your president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So what are the priorities and general overview of relations between our two countries?
As you well know, the relations between Egypt and Ukraine are very good, brotherly relations. We are one of the first countries to recognize Ukraine once they got their independence in 1991, and since then we have established our embassy here in Ukraine. Since then, the relations between the two countries have developed until Egypt became the largest trade partner of Ukraine in Africa and the Middle East. Before the pandemic, we had a trade balance of 2.6 billion US dollars. After the pandemic, now we are speaking yet 1.6, which is still the largest with the Middle East and Africa. We had continuous contacts and political discussions and consultations between the two countries at all levels, which culminated, as you mentioned, with a call between both presidents, Zelensky and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. There was also a meeting between the two ministers of foreign affairs during the General Assembly, also to continue the consultations. We had in the meeting in the call between both presidents, it was highlighted the importance of upgrading the relations, increasing trade, and starting joint manufacturing of products between Ukrainian and Egypt. As well, an invitation was extended for Ukrainian companies to come and invest in the Suez Canal economic zone, which will allow the Ukrainian companies to have also to enter the African market, which will open doors for a lot of trade with the Africans, taking into consideration the relations that Egypt enjoys in the African continent. Discussions also was during the call about investment in major programs, particularly in river transportation, building of river ports and building river vessels, taking into consideration the knowledge and technology of Ukraine in this regard. We also are now exploring the possibility of exporting Egyptian liquid gas to Ukraine, and there is a committee that has been established to start discussion on this matter. As well as you know, Egypt is one of the favorite destinations of Ukrainian tourists. And for Egypt, Ukraine is the #1 tourist since we started again our tourist season after COVID in July 2020. The first plane that arrived was actually carrying 85 Ukrainian tourists. And since then, in the past year, around 1.3 million Ukrainians visited the destinations of Sharm el-Sheikh, Hurghada, and Marsa Alam to enjoy the sun and the beaches of Egypt.
And I'm also personally visited in March and April, and I saw that the measures which were taken by your government in concerning the measures with sanitary was very seriously, especially in the zones for tourists. How seriously was the situation?
Yes, the Egypt government, before starting to open for international tourism, they actually implemented very strict hygiene safety regulations. They even created a new hygiene safety certificate for all hotels and restaurants and any company that is working in tourism must have this hygiene certificate. 844 Egyptian hotels have actually acquired the hygiene certificate. Egypt was also granted the Safe Travel stamp from the World Travel and Tourism Council. 9 airports received the Airport Health accreditation from the Airport Council International. We also created a hotline service for any tourist to inquire about health, about if you have a problem. And recently in July, it was introduced the Ukrainian language specifically for Ukrainian tourists, because they were requesting that this service be available to them in Ukrainian, because it's difficult for them to speak other languages. So this was also incorporated. And so all these measures were introduced before opening the market. And when they opened the tourism, they opened it first for local Egyptians with a capacity of 25%, just to test these measures and see how effective they are. Then it was introduced foreign tourism. Also, hotels were requested to stay within 50% capacity. Only after 6 months, it was increased to 70%, and recently, last July, it was increased to 100%, because it was clear during that year that these measures have worked, and that the tourists who arrived to Egypt, they had very small amount of COVID cases, and even the Egyptian government has decided that if any tourist gets a COVID positive during his stay in Egypt, the Egyptian government will take care of his quarantine period and will pay for hotel accommodation, for medication, as well as for food and allocation during the whole period. And even if he requires stay in the hospital, all of this will be covered by the Egyptian government, so that the tourists feel safe, that they do not require to have their own insurance or so. The government in Egypt will take care of that.
So the touristic sphere still is priority despite the pandemic?
Yes, and it has been, as I said, a very successful story, because we managed to do several events, world events. We had the World Handball World Championship conducted in Egypt, and there was no problems with the COVID. We also had the mummy parade, which saw the movement of 22 mummies from the National Museum into the new Museum of Civilizations. And it was attended by a huge amount of foreign media and foreign personalities, and it also was carried in a very safe environment without any problems or any COVID outbreaks.
As you mentioned, we actually accustomed to visit Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada, Gardaqa, Hardaqa, باللغة العربية in Arab language, and Marsalam. But I know that you, in next year, and I know I found out it personally from one of the top high officials of your country, which was during the exhibition here, touristic exhibition. I know that your country, despite the whole pandemic complications, problems, want to develop touristic sphere, and you maybe have some new insights, new places, touristic places, which would be very interesting for Ukrainian tourists. What can you give some interesting information, new information?
Yes, Egypt has launched a new campaign, touristic campaigns. It's called Egypt is Alive. And it highlights the potential of tourism in Egypt, not only in the sun and beach spheres, but also culture tourism. There are in Egypt 6 archaeological World Heritage sites. In Memphis, it's necropolis. The historic Cairo, Old Cairo, the ancient Thebes and its necropolis, the Nubian monuments from Abu Simbel, Tufayla, Abu Mina, Saint Catherine in Sinai, and Wadi Hitan in Tal al-Amamra. These are all sites that we are now also trying to give more information about, so that the tourists understand that there are a lot of potential for him to enjoy different aspects of Egypt in tourism. There is also eco and sustainable tourism. In the Giza Pyramids Plateau, we have light structured restaurants new, and we have introduced the electric buses since October 2020. And new also is the religious tourism, and we have started the Holy Family Trail that follow the voyage of Christ and Mary during their escape from Jerusalem to Egypt and their return to Egypt. And there are several points into that voyage that are now open for tourism to go and see and follow the same trail. So this is a new area. And we have opened in the past few years new museums, one museum in Sharm el-Sheikh, another museum in Hurghada. The idea was that instead of the tourist having that's coming from for sun and beaches, he can also, instead of having to go to Cairo and so on, he can go and visit the museum in Sharm el-Sheikh and get to know the history of Egypt, and that will give him an idea of what is available also in Egypt. There are some upcoming events that will be milestones. There is the Sphinx Avenue that is going to be created in Luxor. There is the celebration of the Rosetta Stone bicentenary. There is also the Tutankhamun centenary, and the opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum, which will be the biggest museum in the world. So these are all events that hopefully within the next few years will become parts of the tourism destinations in Egypt.
I see. Thanks for your information. Thanks for your actual activity. I know that you are 1 year, not actually 1 year as ambassador. Thanks for your activity. What is the general impression about Ukraine, about the country, about the relations of our country? So, as an ordinary citizen, what can we see? What is the potential of our relations generally?
Look, there are a lot of similarities between Egypt and Ukraine in terms of the composition of the country. We both were agricultural countries. We were both within the socialist network in the 70s and the 80s, and we are now trying to move into the free market economy. And the industrialization of the economy, as well as the fast movement into the IT sphere. And all of these sectors, we are compatible with each other. So we can complement each other in all these areas. And we actually started this year discussions in most of these areas. Egypt is also undergoing a lot of change in its infrastructure, building of new roads, new cities, mega projects, food security. All of these areas are similar to what is being undergone here in Ukraine, because you also need to upgrade all your services, your network, your roads, your electricity grid.
Yes.
So all the areas and projects are similar between the two economies. As well, the size of both economies is similar. The Egyptian economy is almost double the Ukrainian economy, but the number of citizens in Egypt is double what the number of citizens in Ukraine. So at the end, it balances both of us. We are now exporter of liquid gas. Ukrainian is importer of liquid gas. So this is one of the areas we want to complement each other. And the reverse is in food security. Ukraine is one of the biggest producer of food in the world, and Egypt is one of the biggest importer of food in the world. So as you can see, there are areas, and this is the discussion that is currently being undergone by both governments, is how to ensure food security for Egypt in exchange to ensuring energy security for Ukraine. We are also planning, doing the preparations for the bilateral technical committee between Egypt and Ukraine, which will be held in Egypt, in Cairo, in December this year. And several MOUs and treaties will be signed during this to increase the level of cooperation in several fields.
Mr. Ambassador, we have 5 minutes, and last for the interview, I would like to ask you one, for me as an international observer, a very important question. The history of Egypt, especially last 100 years, during last 100 years, very interesting. As you said, we have a lot of similar things in the history, in the geopolitical, regional politics. And now the Egypt has an independent foreign policy, independent foreign position. It's a very important country, not only in Africa, it's in Middle East, in Arab world. It's a very important country in the world. What are the priorities of foreign policy now for Egypt, if we speak generally? What are the most milestones, I would say, for Egypt foreign policy we can emphasize concerning the importance of your country?
Look, now we had passed through, like Ukraine also, 2 revolutions in 2011 and 2014. And this has changed the priorities of the Egyptian government. Currently, the Egyptian government is concentrating on its own development of the economy, so as to able to provide the necessary food and energy and services to its people. To be able to do that, you need to have a stable area. Not only a stable country, but the area around you must be stable. And this is the main priority now, because unfortunately, we live in a very troubled zone, very hot zone. You have the problems between Palestine and Israel. We are trying to help both parties to open again the discussions for the peace according to the principles that was approved by the Arab League. And similarly, we are invested into the Libyan cause to try to stabilize Libya and bring back normalcy between the different components of the society of Libya. And similarly, we are trying to help now Sudan in the latest the latest coup d'etat, which we actually had a lot of cooperation between the previous government, and now we are trying to see how we can assist. We are also assisting the Syrian and the Libyan. So the whole idea is to try to stabilize the region, because once you cannot have economic development and you cannot have prosperity if you are constantly into conflict. And this is one of the problems, unfortunately, that plagues our region.
Yes, but I think Egypt succeeded. And Egypt is a unique country. You try always to find good relations with different countries, despite this geopolitical situation. It's very difficult to do in the world.
Because Egypt has always, over the years, implemented a very important principle, which is the principle of non-interference. We do not like people to interfere in our affairs, but at the same time, we do not interfere in other people's affairs. So even when we are discussing the Libyan crisis, we are discussing the Sudanese crisis, it's not an interference, it's a request by the Libyans or a request by the Sudanese to come and assist.
It's a mediator.
Yes, and we haven't gone and imposed our will on these areas. No, we are actually, even it was the Palestinian and the Israelis who came to us and said that we want to reopen the discussion. There was also some problems between factions in the Palestinian, and we are actually also assisting them to overcome this, so that at least the Palestinian state can again unify itself and concentrate on the main goal of its own independence. So this is our role. We also try to form new coalitions within the Mediterranean and within the Arab world to try and, as I said, to stabilize. Because once you have stability, everybody will prosper, not only Egypt, but all the people around it. And this is very important for us.
Thanks for your very sincere, very professional, very interesting interview. I think you give a lot of information in very brief form, but a lot of very important information for me, for Ukrainians, for all our public. So I want to wish you sincerely the activity, and I think we will see the prosperity of relations between our two countries, between two nations in the next year, despite all the geopolitical problems. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
No, thank you. Nice to meet you.
شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا.
Все отлично. It's very